Don't do it, Mark. You have a great future. Don't start a new congregation. You're going to ruin your life. The speaker was a former B'nai Yehuda congregation president, a lovely guy by the name of Jack Reitzes. Well, I ran into Jack 1 year later in a store. Already elderly, Jack, whom I liked a lot, hurried over to me. Boy, am I glad you didn't take my advice. I was really wrong. 36 years. 36. Double high. Where has it gone, and what did we do? The goal seemed simple enough: to create a home for serious liberal Judaism in southern Johnson County. I particularly wanted a congregation that would be the answer to this question: is there a home for genuine liberal Jewish life, one where Judaism is taken seriously as a way of life that is not orthodox, but is serious about Judaism? Does such a place exist in the metro area? I wanted the answer to that question to be yes, you should go to Beth Torah. Is that what happened? Is that the congregation that we produced 3.5 decades ago? Well, like most things Jewish, the answer is yes and no. For our first publicly announced Friday evening service, we prayed from photocopies of service number 4 from Gates of Prayer, the shortest of the 10 Friday night services in that prayer book. David Harris, who, truth be told, didn't have a singing voice, provided our music from the outset, stood to my right on the pulpit. It wasn't a pulpit, we were just on the same level as everyone else, and there was jubilant singing. About 60 people attended in that building. There was then the interim JCC, and now is the Chabad house. In the front row sat the senior rabbi of the community, Rabbi Morris B. Margulies, retired from Congregation Beth Shalom. Morris was a presence, a huge surprise to me, a compliment, an attestation of legitimacy. As we began this first service, I thought to myself, maybe it would be best if everybody prayed together. And that's the way it's been for 36 years. After the first service, July 17th, 1988, Hal Seder, congregational president, proclaimed we'd hold a congregational meeting when the 100th family joined. That goal we reached 6 weeks later, on September the 6th. We rented the Ramada Inn on 87th and 69 Highway for the High Holy Days. When 600 people showed up for Yom Kippur worship, Carol Seder, looking out over the assembled congregation, proclaimed, poof, instant congregation. We opened a religious school with 90 students, a teacher for every grade except for 7th and 8th. 6 15-year-olds started our first confirmation class, including now Rabbi Brett Kritchever. We ended that year with 120 students. I'd asked the over-the-top busy Cheryl Harris to be the head of the school. Cheryl, whom some of you will remember was the busiest person in God's creation, gulped and said no. I looked really disappointed. Then Cheryl said, okay, I'll do it. And years later said, you know, I got up 4 o'clock every Sunday morning to run that religious school. Most of our teachers that year, like Louise Hipsch and Randy Merker, were experienced, and most of them held teaching degrees. No one took a dime in payment. It was an entirely volunteer faculty. As a matter of fact, that characterized the entire congregation. Volunteers starting the first new Jewish congregation in Greater Kansas City since 1966. So what happened? What really brought hundreds of families to this new experiment in serious Jewish life in southern Johnson County, Kansas? Our second and third presidents, Cheryl Harris and Eileen Gary, interviewed the founders after our first decade and published a book called Voices, Recollections from the Early Days of Congregation Beth Torah. Here are some typical reminiscences. Roshan Paris, founder and board member, recollected, Beth Torah was a melting pot for both of us. A meeting pot for both of us. 99% of the people came because of other people. It was a people-to-people operation. Without those relationships, we would not have built a caring community. We built it one person, one family at a time. The infant is now into adolescence, she said. I get private satisfaction from watching people that experience Beth Torah the way I hoped that they would. Tom Cohn followed up Roshan's comments with, this has really pulled me in. This is the congregation where I feel most comfortable. I feel good every time I go. I feel connected to the faith and to Beth Torah. I still have the sense of being home whenever I walk in. Founder Donna Gould, remembering Beth Torah's impact on important events in her life, concluded, it has grown into a support system which made me feel at home. I have found many friends, such as in our Chavurah. Moving here and then losing a spouse, you don't know how much you need. When it happens to you, you look there for a sense of comfort, a sense of belonging, something that makes you feel good. So that's it. We grew by leaps and bounds to establish the largest Jewish religious school in Greater Kansas City. We had the highest retention rate after bar and bat mitzvah of any Reform congregation in North America. An unpublicized fact. That came from the Union for Reform Judaism. Eventually, Sunday mornings often brought 300 to 400 children and their parents together in this sanctuary for family worship, kindergarten through 6th grade, along with bagels and cream cheese before religious school. We'd outgrown our 18 classrooms, and so we put 7th through 10th grade on Wednesday evenings. There just wasn't enough space for everyone. Full High Holy Day worship had 2 services and an exhausted volunteer choir. Erev Sukkot, every year, of course, 5 days after Yom Kippur, brought 200 to 250 congregants for brief worship outside and a sukkah to decorate while everyone socialized and simply had a good time celebrating a Chag. The Jewish community's High Holy Day food collection. Year after year, a collection, by the way, started in this congregation. Year after year, we produced 55% of all the food collected from all the congregations. Hundreds of volunteers, most of them with their children, served weekend meals at the Restart Shelter every January. We paid for their month of food, and we served their food on weekends, Saturday and Sunday, lunch and dinner, paid for by an anonymous congregant who insisted every year that the money come from him. When we dedicated this building, Beth Torah congregants donated $21,000 to pay for the food at every soup kitchen in Wyandotte, Jackson, and Johnson counties. We made sure that when we were celebrating, no one would go hungry. In addition, since we surpassed our goal, we started a fund to give protein foods to harvesters because people generally didn't donate protein. So what worked? Our congregants wanted a caring community, and that's what they built. Things like more than a dozen chavurot for study and for socializing. Special Shabbatot once a month, where congregants prayed together with friends, and at the end of the service, we said hamotzi and had bread and wine here in this sanctuary, and we didn't worry about who was going to spill what. And one more thing, where Reformed Jews rarely attended Ne'ilah in Reformed congregations around the country, that is worship at the end of Yom Kippur, we had standing room only for a 45-minute Ne'ilah service where congregants brought their friends from other congregations to sing Havdalah with gusto and put their arms around one another in a finale to the holiest day of the year. But the Jewish world of the United States, including greater Kansas City, has changed in the last couple of decades. Remember, in 1988, the internet didn't exist. There was no social media. By the first decade of this century, new realities had restructured Jewish life. No longer did young people believe that they must join a synagogue as a responsibility of being an adult. Up until this generation, everyone figured, I don't necessarily want to go, but I have to be a member. That has ceased. Monthly bulletins no longer communicated as email and podcasts and texting and Instagram took over communication to the communities. People complained that Jewish life was too expensive, with congregational dues to support a synagogue, plus federation pledges, plus JCC memberships, and some sending their children to day schools. How to cope with these new realities became a major Jewish life problem, discussed all over the country. All this caused a questioning of the purpose of synagogue. First, the new electronic means of communication increased messaging, but decreased personal connections between people. Facebook friends, folks discovered, are not really friends at all because there's no intimacy, there's no support, there's no sense that I am known as a human being. So people now have an iPhone and more screen time and less connection. The 2008 economic collapse devastated congregational budgets all over the country. Fortunately, Beth Torah had donors who stepped up to meet our deficits in 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. But a new world emerged for liberal congregations requiring a different approach to Jewish life. The world had changed. Rabbi Richard Address, in his 2011 book, Seekers of Meaning, summarized the reality of synagogue life in an era in which alienation and loneliness are so rampant that the Surgeon General of the United States last year declared a health emergency due to loneliness and isolation. Rabbi Richard Address states, the most powerful and important aspects of our lives are relationships that we have, and that as we age, those relationships gain greater importance and are the source of our search for meaning. Relationships help give our lives texture and definition, as well as providing a sense of validation and support and caring and purpose. They are the antidote to our fear of loneliness. Religion originates in mysteries beyond our comprehension, like fear, the fear of death, the fear of loneliness. Those are the origins of all religions. But the antidote to both is friendship, genuine relationship. We don't have an answer, but if we go through it with someone who cares about us, we have a solution. Beth Torah succeeded in large measure because people found here genuine relationships, genuine friendships that were maintained through life celebrations and through the hardships that plague everyone eventually. American society has become extremely isolating. Genuine relationships are hard to come by. Millennials are not marrying, and the statistics say that even sexual relationships have diminished. We are experiencing an impoverishment of the spirit, described by the Surgeon General as a crisis of loneliness. But the solution is right here. It's right in this room, and it's present even now. The solution is the ties between everyone who sits here. When you said hello, when you introduced yourselves, that's the beginning of the antidote for the plague of loneliness. The optimal size for a congregation is not the 650 families that we had. It's not the 450 families that was our original goal. The optimal size for a congregation is 350 families. Why? Because larger congregations are often professionalized. Everything is done by skilled and trained professionals. You need something done, here's the person on staff that'll take care of it. But at smaller congregations, you have to get involved. Just like the successful first years at Beth Torah. We were a hands-on deck congregation. We set up the chairs. We put them away after. There was a basketball goal over my head. But everyone who belonged came every Friday night. At the outset, we were setting our own chairs, but who cares? What was important was who was there and what we meant to one another. Watching what's happening at Beth Torah right now, without highly trained professionals, but with three of the most committed people I have ever met in my life, this congregation is actually poised for success. I know there's no rabbi right now. Leslie has more or less proven that rabbis are not needed to envision a program or a future for a congregation. Jim Kaplan's worship leadership has demonstrated that skilled lay people are extremely capable of worship leadership. Truth be told, rabbis are not even needed for life cycle events. All over the United States, funerals are often being done by families. Baby namings have been done by parents for years. Weddings are being done, you've all experienced this, I suspect, by my best friend Lisa or my Uncle Jim is officiating at my wedding. Someone who's special to the bride and groom is getting a license for a day. I certainly can train people myself how to lead funerals, and working with families is a skill known by social workers and psychologists and people who are simply sensitive to the issues of mourning. We are the most educated Jewish community in the history of the world. And we can apply that to make this the most successful Jewish community that has ever been. In other words, involved congregations with lower costs are the future. Beth Torah still has the best designed and most beautiful sanctuary in the city, in my not so humble opinion. That's the biggest expense for a congregation, and we've already got one. But the greatest need of a congregation is involvement and friendship. Allow me to let you in on a reality. I've been a rabbi for just shy of 50 years. At the outset, rabbis led everything in Reform congregations, particularly funerals. The rabbi gave the eulogy, and he named the babies. But now, all the mourners have been to college. Many express themselves as eloquently or more eloquently than the rabbi. And so today it's common for 3 or 4 or 5 members of the family to give beautiful eulogies. And then the rabbi has to come in and God, I hope they're listening to me too. I recently officiated a funeral for a person who was alone in life. One family member remaining, that's all. No children, no spouse, all alone. But the sister gave a beautiful eulogy, and friends who had attended spoke up right there on the spot. And all of us had a sense of how that life had been lived, and more importantly, why that life was important to the people who had taken the time to gather. That's what we want eulogies to do. Genuine relationships, not belief in God, it turns out, are the bedrock reason for the existence of congregations, where the tough but genuine issues of living get resolved. What does my life mean? How do I cope with the death of people I care about? How do I cope with the prospect of my own mortality? What's my relationship to the general community and to the Jewish community? How do we react to anti-Semitism? And what about Israel? All these are being addressed by members of the congregation right now, and they need to be addressed by the community together. In other words, when all of us make an effort to bring our friends to this place that we love, that's the reason you're here. When we commit to sustaining our community with our own hands, as is currently occurring, but we need to increase our involvement. Beth Torah will once again, I guarantee it, be the most active, most meaningful congregation in the community. So one last point. I'm a baby boomer. I was born 4 years after the beginning of the boom, 1949. When I went to elementary school, they built an elementary school. When I went to junior high school, they built a junior high school. And when I went to high school, they built a high school. You may have noticed that the religious issues of a congregation are best suited to older people. Young people are focused on their children's issues, on getting ahead in their occupations, on establishing a home, on saving for later events like retirement. But you empty nesters, you who are contemplating your parents' or your own mortality and lightly discussing it with absolutely no one because it's so personal, you who have time or can make time for the activities that please you, you are once again in the bulge of the demographic, as you have been since birth. We now know that anti-Semitism is increasing in this country. There is no doubt about it. Whether you call the political left or you call it the political right, there's an increase in the alienation of Jews. There's more alienation than ever. Just like in the first few years when we started with 20 families, this can be your home away from home, where the issues that are really bothering you are the issues that we can discuss and handle together. Congregations all over the country are closing or they're merging because they've not found the key that Beth Torah knew at its inception. It's all about community, community, community. Big corporate synagogues are not the answer to an alienating society in which even in restaurants you see people on their iPhones unable to talk to other people at the table. That's isolating, that's alienation, and religion and this congregation are the solution. Beth Torah has great leadership. I'm willing to do my part, and I hope all of you are as well. Together, we will rebuild our spiritual home ourselves with our own hands, with our own minds, with our own conviction, because it's what we need. Our children, our grandchildren will thank us because we have built this for ourselves and gifted it to them. Im tirtzu, ein zu agada. If you will it, it is no dream. Kein yehi ratzon.